At Indie Booksource, you can shop by genre or by author, and you will be buying direct from the author's main purchase link. We offer hundreds of titles in formats that include ebooks, paperback, hardbound, and audiobook. Support an indie author. Visit indiebooksource.com today.
Welcome to Meet the Author, where you can join in on insightful conversations with best-selling and award-winning indie published authors. Your hosts today are Rob and Joan, who themselves are indie published authors, book publicists, and paranormal investigators with Tampa Bay Spirits, based in Tampa Bay, Florida. Thanks for dropping by. And now, on with the show.
Hi, I'm Rob.
And I'm Joan. We're so glad that you're here, whether you're watching while this is being broadcast live as a vodcast or you're listening to our podcast. We're really happy that you're in our audience. Today is a pre-recorded show, so I just want to make sure that you know that and that you're not trying to send us comments and ask questions and wondering why we're ignoring you. We're not. We're pre-recorded.
Just like the banner says, pre-recorded right there.
Yeah. So today our author is Dr. Michele Finneran, and you wanted to say something?
She's a professional counselor and the author of the book Surviving Domestic Abuse. And we'd like to welcome Dr. Finneran right now.
Hi.
Hello. Dr.
Hi.
Finneran.
Nice
Welcome
to meet you.
To the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for being a guest on our show. I think that what you have to talk about is a very important subject.
Absolutely.
Actually, maybe before we get into how and why you wrote the book, I should let people know that I myself am a survivor of domestic abuse. Dr. Finneran and I talked about it a little bit before the show. It's not something that I normally talk about, not because I'm ashamed or I feel sorry for myself or I'm still having a hard time, but just because I notice that usually people, when they hear the story, feel very badly and feel sorry for me. And I want you to know that I'm fine. I'm well. Rob and I have been together for 46 years, and that's a long time ago in my past. However, what I do want people to know is that you never know what's going on in someone else's house, and you never know what that person is going through. And I went through a pretty horrific time and even reached out to family members for help and couldn't get any help. And so it progressed from just being emotional abuse, but then it went down a very textbook pattern of separating me from everyone, not allowing me to see anyone, not allowing anyone to see me. Then it developed into physical abuse until finally that was so bad that I had no choice but to leave. Either it would have been ended in my death or the death of my children. And I had to leave. But I met Rob, and we've had a very wonderful marriage. The children all feel like, though they're all grown up adults now, you all know that our oldest child is 55 and the youngest is 39. They all feel like Rob is their dad. And some of them are biologically his, and you are their dad. He's been their dad in every sense of the word. He's raised them. He's taken them to school, brought them home from school, took care of them when they were sick.
Taught them how to drive.
Taught them how to drive.
Lived through it.
That was, yeah. I stayed at home. And I let him teach them how to drive, which all of you that are going through it, God help you. What?
They're all very good drivers, by the way.
Yes, they are.
Successfully passed the test.
Yes. And anyway, I wanted you to know that and to know that this is something you can survive. I told Dr. Finneran that I was a survivor of domestic abuse, and that's how I feel. I feel like I'm a survivor. I do not feel like a victim. And I pretty much during it, I wasn't much of a victim anyway. I really fought really hard for a long time to see if there was anything I could do to save the marriage, and then to get out of the marriage without there being any bloodshed. And that's not a joke. That's the reality.
Right.
So I just wanted to put that out there so everybody would know this is perhaps more predominant than you would think it is, that it happens to more people than you would be aware of.
Yes.
So, okay.
So, Dr. Finneran, welcome.
Hi.
And,
Thank you.
tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so I'm in sunny South Florida area. I have a private practice called Beck & Associates located in Coral Springs, Florida. I started in the mental health field very young. I would say about 18 when I did my first internship at Stetson University in DeLand, Florida, where I worked as an internship for a crisis stabilization unit in Daytona, Florida. And that's when I really started. I really excelled in all my courses when it comes to psychology. But when I did that internship, I really, really knew this is the profession that I needed to be in at a very, very young age. So I would say for the first 10 years of my life, I went to Stetson. I got my bachelor's in psychology. Then I went directly right from there into my master's program to get my master's at Nova Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And then right from there, did not skip a beat, went right into the PhD program. I got a PhD at Nova Southeastern University for conflict resolution and dispute analysis. Between my PhD program, I did acquire the state license test for the license of to be a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida. So I am licensed, which is the way I'm able to bill and open my business as a licensed clinician from the state of Florida. And I've been in education for a long time. I've been in community mental health for a long time, working in different various community agencies and municipalities. And the last 12 years, I've been in private practice. And I went into private practice because I wanted to venture out, even though it was a risk to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to establish my own clinical private practice, which is typically made up of preteens, teens, adults, couples, marriages, and families. And I also work with, organizations and municipalities as well. My main practice, my focus of my main practice has been first responders and service providers. So that's been my main focal point. But how I came about researching domestic violence is a completely different kind of story than what I'm doing right now. So a little bit different. Yeah.
How did you decide to write the book on surviving domestic abuse?
When I was in my PhD program, I did another internship at a local jail, and I worked inside an inmate female custody unit for domestic violence, anger management, and conflict resolution. And what I did is I would run groups, two about 1.5 hour groups each day, and I would teach the population about domestic violence, about victimization. And what I found when I did a lot of one-on-one, counseling, is that these incarcerated women were actually victims of domestic violence, which really kind of blew me away. I didn't know. I wasn't anticipating that at all. And you don't really know that until you're like working inside a system like something like this. So I went to my mentor at the time, my PhD dissertation chair, Dr. McKay, and I presented this idea. Like, I think I'm having a really hard time just trying to wrap my brain around what I'm seeing inside the jail. And she said, why don't you do some research and academically to see kind of some of the research gaps that are in, victims of domestic violence that utilize formal and informal supports and services. So I did the research, and at the time there wasn't a whole lot of information about what was effective or ineffective when domestic violence victims use formal and informal supports. And when I'm talking about formal supports, I'm speaking of specifically professionals, helping professionals in the field, such as law enforcement, mental health counselors, clergy, judicial system, medical staff, and nurses. And then we speak of informal supports in the book. It talks about parents, relatives, friends, coworkers / supervisors or employers.
So your support system.
Your support system, your informal support systems, and your formal support systems that help you abolish a domestic violence dynamic.
So why do you suppose that people who are in a domestic violence situation do not reach out for help?
There's several reasons. In the first section of my book, the first section, it's called Seeking Help. And there are several barriers for victims to seek out help. The first one I would namely recognize is they're innately embarrassed and ashamed that they're even in this situation that they're in. And hence they pull back on speaking up and speaking out in that situation. So that's one defeating cause as to why there is a apprehension of reaching out for help. Secondly, a lot, not to discredit, victims of domestic violence, but when you're in a domestic violence situation and you don't really know until it becomes prevalent that you are in an actually abusive dynamic. When you're in a relationship, you don't really realize that's not a healthy relationship until you get out of that relationship. So a lot of the victims weren't really aware that they were experiencing domestic violence. The name calling, the verbal, it starts off verbally and escalates to physical, but they didn't really recognize it as abuse until they knew something was wrong. They just really couldn't identify it until what a lot of my survivors did is they did their own type of research on like relationships and types of personalities in relationships and what that even looks like. So they did their own research and they educated themselves before reaching out to any formal supports on what kind of dynamic they were actually in.
Yeah, well, I can relate to that because for me, it definitely was number one, embarrassment. I was ashamed of what was going on and felt as a failure, felt like somehow it was my fault. And of course, the people that I had around me that I could talk to, my parents, were telling me it was my fault, that I just needed to stop whatever I was doing that made him so angry. Now, of course, I'm older. I'm 75 years old. So back when all this was happening, which was over 50 years ago, I don't think there was much education as there is now, but having another family member go through the same thing, I was shocked and dismayed to find out how little progress we'd actually made for this whole thing. I know very well. Rob and I, for those of you who don't know, used to be in the ministry. And so we know very well that a lot of the victims of domestic dispute are the ones that end up in jail.
Yes.
And it's a very unjust and it's a very difficult situation. So we just need to keep going at this thing and trying to get people educated and trying to reach out to people that we think might be in that situation. Do you know of any way that people could tell? Are there any signs or symptoms to know if one of your family members or one of your friends or close associates is a victim of domestic abuse and how to approach them? Is there anything we can do?
Well, one of the things that ends up happening is the victim becomes more and more distant, alienated, and isolated from their family members and their friends. And that's not because of the victim's doing, that's because of the perpetrator's kind of manipulative control aspect that they have over them. So that's one thing. If you see your loved one kind of change and kind of withdraw a little bit, then, there's something, obviously, we don't know what's behind closed doors until it's revealed. So that's one sign that the distance and the alienation and the isolation is hugely problematic for the victim. And, it confuses the family members because it makes them feel like, well, we're just not close anymore, or our relationship has changed. But no, there's something even deeper going on there. So if you see that in your family members' relationship, or with your daughters or whomever it may be, you might want to explore that a little bit deeper, or think about it a little bit on a broader scale.
Is there anything that parents should be educating their children on as the children are growing up, in order to avoid something like this happening to them?
I think one of the best things for teaching children in a household is teaching by example and role modeling. A lot is to be said, not so much with what is being said, but what is being seen. So I think that when you're exposed or witness to dysfunctional, unhealthy dynamics, that's what you learn. That's what you know. So really, like if the mother is in an unhealthy relationship, then I think there needs to be some sort of reworking of that relationship and exposure to the children generationally below them. I think that is a huge lesson and teaching tool that parents can actually give their children, is their own dynamic with their partners.
So in reading this book, what kind of tools and information will the reader find?
The reader, the book is really designed not just for the survivor or for the victim. It's really designed for people, a myriad of people who are attached or who are helping the victim. We talk about the formal supports, law enforcement, all those formal supports and all the informal supports. So this book doesn't have just the use for the victim and the survivor, but anybody who is treating or has a personalized relationship with a victim in a family dynamic or in some sort of personal relationship. This book is kind of like a tool to help formal and informal supports to notate what works and what doesn't work when you are engaged with a victim of domestic violence.
Excellent. You were going to ask something?
Yeah. Are there any national phone numbers or
helplines
that you would recommend for people?
Yeah. Yes, there are. The National Coalition of Domestic Violence is a good one to have. I actually have a list of there's just I have a list that I can send to you regarding all the resources that are out there for DV victims in any kind of situation, whether it be in a different type of relationship, different culture, different age. I have a myriad of supports and people, resources that I can send to you that might be helpful in terms of helping people who need the help.
So there are a lot of lifelines out there.
Yes. It's finding those resources is challenging. They're there, but it's finding them and putting them together and utilizing them. And that's the challenging part. It's not readily available. You have to kind of search and research them.
Right.
You just hit upon something really interesting, which, I had known a little bit about, but not a lot about, but that would be the cultural differences in how you respond to that. I mean, I know what my culture and my background was, and I was raised a Roman Catholic, and it's a big taboo to get divorced. And I was married to a Catholic. We were both Irish Catholic, and so you just didn't get divorced. I mean, nobody in my family had been divorced. And so I think that's a hurdle that some people have to overcome. I don't think it's as bad now for Catholics or Christians. Plenty of them get divorced now and are not frowned upon. Back in the day it was. Yes. But just when you said that, it started me thinking about, for example, people from from India, the Indian culture. That's a whole different dynamic. The Arab culture, that's a different dynamic that just by knowing people from those cultures, I would imagine that would be really difficult to step out of that.
Mm-hmm.
Indigenous people are going to have another whole set of problems. I mean, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think most Hispanic peoples would be more like what I went through. It'd be a religious taboo and a family taboo to do that. But anything else, any other kind of cultural problems that you can think of that might be
I think you nailed it on the head. I think that the biggest one is the cultural kind of norm, if you will, for the specific culture, and the religious kind of taboo of not divorcing, especially if you don't have a family of a history of divorces in the family, and
right.
So it's kind of just like if you're speaking of religion, if you're Catholic, that's kind of like a no-no, or was a no-no. Now there's a little bit more sensitivity and stigma released from, obviously staying, in a abusive relationship in a marriage. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And I believe in Christian too. In the Christian culture, there's a lot more leeway now than when we were first in the ministry. It was still like you are married for life. Of course, we were divorced and remarried. So
right.
And we were pastors.
Right.
So we were okay with it. We were really fine if you're being abused. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like stomping out what is considered to be like supposed to be like abiding by the rules and the norms, and really like it's a whole new level of awareness that we're living in today's day and age. It's just a whole level of awareness in terms of mental health and psychology and well-being. And with especially, it's really skyrocketed this level of mental health awareness through the pandemic. So
oh my gosh.
So I mean, and the area that really spiked up in terms of the pandemic has been domestic violence, because people are enclosed with their perpetrator, and it's been like kind of riveting to see those numbers skyrocket, and hotlines and domestic violence agencies are just can't hold as many people as they need to.
Right.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. Actually, I wanted to, after our commercial break, which we're going to have to go to here shortly to hear a word from our sponsors, I did want to talk to you after the book giveaway and giving out all your information where people can reach you, touch upon a little bit on first responders. We also have first responders in our family. And it's been a rough ride.
Yes, it has. It has for them.
Yep. We've got a lot of first responders.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's take a few minutes, a couple minute break. Nobody go away. Everyone stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Check out these great books that we're going to be talking about here.
Yeah.
People Who Like to Read Want to Get Their Hands on Books by Becca Jones.
Becca Jones, the breakthrough author who tells it like it is. It takes courage to tell a story when it reveals dark secrets. Becca Jones delves deep into the hidden world of sexual abuse. She tells what happened and also tells how she survived.
Meant to Be is much more than just entertaining. Meant to Be gives you a point of reference, hope to cling to, and becomes a guide for survival if you have suffered the same thing. Meant to Be, Becca Jones, a must-have.
Meant to Be is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and many other bookseller websites.
Dear Lord, she's still alive.
Who's still alive?
Maris! That's who!
Come on, Angie, that's impossible.
Impossible or not, she's still alive, I tell you! She killed that boatload of people, and she's just getting started. There's no limit to what she will do.
It's not easy to kill a siren. It takes a formula and a plan. Siren Song 2 is the spellbinding sequel to Siren Song. Both novels by George Dismukes.
Siren Song 2 will be on bookshelves and bookseller websites in July. Don't miss it.
Well, without much ado, let's start telling people where they can reach you. All right, so and stay tuned for the book giveaway, because really, if you're going through this yourself, definitely go ahead and get a free copy, an ebook of this wonderful book, because as Dr. Finneran said, you'll find all of those places where you can get help, nationally and probably locally. So, that'd be a good resource for you.
Right.
All right. And her website is drmichellefinneran.com. And for those of you who are listening and can't see this banner, let me spell that out for you. It's DRMICHELEFINNERAN. Okay.
.com.
.com. I didn't think I needed to spell .com or website.
No,
all right.
not.
Facebook is Dr.Finneran. LinkedIn is Michele Finneran. Now, this is a different one. Instagram, this is her practice that she told you about at the beginning of the show, is Beck and Associates. So that's the Instagram, but I will spell that for you. VECC Asperam ASSOICIATES. Yeah, I never say that right. And email is Michele_Finneran@yahoo.com. All right. So
now the book giveaway.
yes.
There we go. You ready?
Yep.
I'm ready. Okay, book giveaway for the first 3 people to email Michele_Finneran@yahoo.com will win an ebook copy of Surviving Domestic Abuse.
Yes.
So get your fingers typing.
Get your
Yes.
fingers going. We'll leave that ticker up for those of you that are
And
watching, but I haven't put up her book cover yet, so let me do that now.
I would also say, and I'm going to volunteer this for you, Dr. Finneran, if anybody was to email you with questions or needing help, needing links,
Yes.
to who to call,
Yes.
you'll be more than happy to answer them, right?
Absolutely. What I'll do is if the people email the giveaway, if they ask for a list of resources, I will send a Word document of a list of national resources that will be attached to my response to the first 3 people that email in for the e-copy book.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I should probably say that I did have therapy, 2 different times. You sometimes you have to search to find the right therapist for you and to get the right kind of information. And like I said, back then it was much different. I have since been diagnosed with PTSD after that. I mean, that was probably 20 years ago that I was diagnosed with PTSD. So I was very jumpy about certain things.
Right. And that's not an uncommon diagnosis,
No.
Having a lot of anxiety,
Yes.
and, I just feel there's a cover of the book.
Yeah.
I just, historically, what, you mentioned, it's not uncommon for domestic abuse to happen while pregnant.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
For those that are just listening to this, can you describe the cover for us?
So this is Surviving Domestic Abuse, Formal and Informal Supports and Services. And this, my name is Dr. Michele Finneran. And this book is actually an academic book, but it's really more for anybody any formal and informal supports that are helping and assisting victims of domestic violence, whether it be, a counselor, or whether it be a law enforcement officer. There's certain things to do that's effective, and there's certain things not to say or do that's ineffective when relating to a victim of domestic violence. And it also has to do with, the parents, the friends, and the coworkers and employers. So. And
So
this is published by Routledge Taylor and Francis Group.
So the cover is Surviving Domestic Abuse on a white background in red. And then, of course, Formal and Informal Supports and Services in small black letters under that. But then there's a picture of a woman in the shadows with like the shadows of a blind in front of her. So that's the cover for those of you that are looking out. So I had told Dr. Finneran when we were talking in the pre-show that in my case, the abuse escalated to physical abuse when I was pregnant with my first child, which is a very scary thing.
and actually not uncommon. That's because now the attention is not on the perpetrator. The attention now is on the unborn child. So it leaves the mother, the victim, in a very distressful physical and emotional situation while carrying a child. You're not supposed to be in that much undue stress when you're pregnant.
Right. Yes. And it showed after I delivered my first baby, I weighed less than when I got pregnant with her, which is unusual.
Wow. That is very much. I
went down to 118 pounds. So I was pretty small when I finished.
Yeah.
But she was healthy, still is healthy.
Good.
And not a victim of domestic abuse, nor a survivor of domestic abuse. But yeah. So what I wanted to ask you about is, what have you been seeing in our first responders? I mean, we're not just talking nurses and doctors. I know from talking to our doctor that she has been devastated by the loss that she's seen. And our son-in-law was an ICU nurse for COVID patients. He's since gone into management where he's at Tampa General Hospital. And so I know how hard it's been on the people that I know that are first responders, but it's everyone, isn't it? It's firemen, policemen.
Yeah. So, for first responders and service providers are what I consider to be law enforcement. And we're talking about anybody in law enforcement, whether it be road patrol, detectives, special agents, detention officers, communications, 911 dispatch, whatever the case may be, firefighters and paramedics, mental health professionals have really, have skyrocketed. Nurses and any type of medical staff, considered. What I would say now was a service provider that has really been bombarded since, or definitely a change for this profession, is teachers and educators. They have had a change, a completely different skill set in the beginning stages of the pandemic. So my next writing project is focusing on compassion fatigue and first responders during COVID-19. And compassion fatigue is something that's a little bit different. People compare it a lot to burnout. People understand it as burnout, but it's a different element. Burnout is due to an environmental situation or stressors that take place. Compassion fatigue is almost considered secondary trauma, where you are seeing things or hearing things and you're getting from first responders who have been firstly traumatized, and then the helper or the first responder is getting secondary trauma, or talking about secondary trauma. That's compassion fatigue, and it's kind of like the negative costs of caring for the health professional careers. Charles Figley is the one who really spearheaded coined this phrase compassion fatigue. And so my next project that I'm working on right now, I'm in the process of collecting data from first responders about their work experience, their personal life during COVID-19 and their experience with compassion fatigue.
I think the clergy also.
Yes.
Because I know we experienced compassion fatigue before COVID. We were doing full-time ministry.
Yeah. It's a heavy load. Yeah.
It's a very heavy. You see a lot, you hear a lot, you know all the things that other people don't know.
Exactly.
And you really can't talk about it.
Right.
Because it's their private stuff and you need to keep it private.
Right.
And it's a lot. I mean, sometimes I would be on the phone 8 hours a day, just listening to people's problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you listen to people's problems and you have that empathetic, unconditional support, you see things and you feel things through their eyes, which can be secondary trauma, which is also leads to a lot of psychological symptoms.
Yeah, it's so I would throw clergy in there too.
Yes, absolutely.
They probably need a lot of help after these last 2 years.
Yes, absolutely.
We're retired from that, so
thank goodness.
At least we didn't get hit with that. That would have been, I mean, really,
Too much.
Yeah, I can believe they are bouncing balls with as many members as they have in their congregation, because this has been a really rough 2 years for everybody.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Out of my practice, the two main populations that I was working with that really got hit with a heavy dose were my teachers and my teens. And when you think of teens, you think these kids should be resilient. They should bounce back. I was doing a session with the teen at the beginning of the week and a check-in at the end of the week with them because they were in so much distress. That people don't understand the school environment is such a big part of their lives and socialization. When that was completely taken away from them and everything was done, virtual learning, having teachers learn the virtual systems, trying to teach students who some students have a very hard time learning in that fashion. It was very challenging for both populations, I would say, the most that I experienced in my clinical private practice.
I know that our youngest daughter has a 9-year-old and a 2-year-old, right? A 7-year-old who acts like a 40-year-old, so I don't know how to hear. The 9-year-old is a boy and the 7-year-old is a girl, and she's fierce. I pity the fool that would ever try to abuse her. But this is very telling to me. They went to, they took the kids to a playground, and they've been very careful about wearing masks and social distancing and all of that. And a lot of people are not. And that, it's up to everyone what they choose. But I'm just saying this daughter and her husband and their children were. And there was a father with 2 children younger, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, playing at the same playground. But he was also masked up and social distancing. And the parents talked, the father and my daughter and her husband started talking and found out they all had the same kind of outlook and had been really safe. And then on their way home, the daughter said, the 7-year-old said that the 4-year-old boy had seen them playing on like that merry-go-round thing that you run on and you jump on and you go around.
Mm-hmm.
And then had seen them playing on the jungle gym on the inside. And he said, "Is that fun?" And they said, "Yeah, it's really fun. Haven't you ever been on it?" And he said, "No, because of the virus."
Yeah.
And I thought about that. And he was 4.
Mm-hmm.
So he was 2
Mm-hmm.
when we went into lockdown. And he was so wistful looking at that. I mean, that broke my heart. I'm like,
I know.
a 4-year-old that's
I
never
know.
been on a jungle gym because of the virus. I mean, I thought, oh,
Yeah.
take out some sanitizers, Dad, and wipe it down.
Yeah. Yeah.
For
Spray it
us
up.
all.
Yeah.
Let them go on.
Uh-huh.
Oh my gosh. Broke my heart. It really did.
Absolutely. I know.
I think this is a good place to stop for our second set of
Do you now?
commercials. I don't know why. It just seems logical. So why don't we take a little break here, another couple of minutes. Don't go away, everybody.
Stay tuned.
Got
More to come.
More to come.
Yeah.
Many secrets are hidden within the darkness of the jungle. Behold, this one about a man, a woman, a black jaguar, and an ancient Maya legend. Two Faces of the Jaguar is a novel by George Dismukes that will take you deep into the jungle and capture your imagination until the last word. Two Faces of the Jaguar is book 1 of a trilogy. Two Faces of the Jaguar, where only the adventurous dare to read.
Two Faces of the Jaguar, The Lost City, and The Jaguar's Quest are available on Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, and many other bookseller websites. Two Faces of the Jaguar, the book people are talking about. Get your copy today.
This award-winning thriller has it all. Murder, political intrigue, mob revenge, and a bit of romance. Not to mention strong female and male characters with a storyline that could be tomorrow's headline news. Now for a quick peek into our story. To help solving a nationwide plot involving the assassination of several U.S. senators, the O'Rourke team is called in. To complicate matters, they now have to work against the clock to rescue one of their own. You see, the mob didn't take too kindly to the O'Rourke team's involvement last spring. It seems to have led to the indictment of their boss. Will they succeed?
Hey, we survived that okay. Dr. Finneran, I would like to ask you about the writing of your book. Number one, how long did it take? I know it's going to be a lot different than the normal books we talk about because it is nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're not going to be flying by the seat of your pants like a lot of the other authors do that we talk to.
Right.
What was it like? I mean, what kind of an experience did you have doing it?
I actually had a wonderful experience, and it just, I knew that the dissertation that I did was something that I wanted to I got, with the interviews that I had with the survivors were probably the most riveting interviews I've ever had. I had 90-minute interviews with survivors, and they were open-ended questions, semi-structured, and it was a qualitative study, meaning that I collected data, analyzed the data, and find common themes in the data that were within each survivor and each question. And it was just, having these interviews with the survivors was actually a complete honor for me, and such an education for me, learning from them. I transcribed I recorded all with, of course, with their permission, and with the university's permission. I recorded all the interviews, and I transcribed all the interviews, and then I began to analyze the data. And the process was such an amazing process for me. And the actual publication of the book by Routledge was, very, very smooth, very, very smooth. It took I did it during the pandemic. So it took about a year, a year and a half to kind of get it all together. So I really do feel that it's something that when I published and it was put out and promoted, I was very proud of. I was very proud of being a first-time author. I've been in clinical practice and community mental health for a very long time, but this was the first real writing project that I ever really seriously thought about. And once you write a book and you publish it, you kind of get an itch. Yeah, right? As you know, you get an itch to want to create and use your creative outlets and kind of write and perfect the skill of your writing technique and your strategy and organization of a book. So the book is very well organized. It's very easy to read. It's not just for scholars or for academia. It's really for anyone who might be interested in learning more about what victims go through, what survivors go through, and how to go about helping them, regardless if you're in a formal support or informal support.
Yeah. Now, in writing fiction, you follow a story. If you're writing a story, you have an arc. What kind of plotting did you do?
So this is actually like it's very research driven. So I had to do investigative interviews, which that was my data. And with the data, you look, like I said, this is called saturation of data, where you see common things that pop up. For instance, one of the things that popped up when we talked about law enforcement intervention is law enforcement really needs to do a better job in terms of training when dealing with the victim population. They're so used to dealing with criminals and the bad people of society. When they're dealing with victims, it needs to be a completely different approach and a completely different type of method that they use when talking or treating a victim of domestic violence. What ends up happening was when people were talking to law enforcement and law enforcement was talking to them, a lot of my survivors felt re-victimized by the way law enforcement was speaking to them.
Absolutely.
Wow. Yeah.
So the training, what comes out of this is there needs to be training on sensitivity, training on victim, working with victims and how to go about talking to victims and treating them. Another thing that popped out in terms of saturation of information or data that was unexpected was when speaking with informal supports, we talk a little bit about their parents. And what I collected was all the survivors, every single one of them had a dysfunctional, detached relationship with their mothers, their daughters to their mothers. So I feel like this is not something that I didn't anticipate. I didn't even know that was part of a process, but it was so common in all my survivors' interviews. And why it was so common is because generationally, the victims have seen even their own mothers go through victimization and learn helplessness and learn how to become a victim when they go out into the world. And also another riveting thing is, a lot of the mother-daughter bonding just was not your typical bonding. It was more physical help, babysitting, giving money, transportation. But what survivors really did need from their mother is emotional bonding, emotional connection, emotional availability. And that wasn't the case there. And so as they grew up, the daughters / victims sought it out in an intimate partner relationship. And when they sought it out, they sought out a traumatic emotional bonding with their perpetrator.
That's exactly what happened to me. To give you an idea of my mother, and not just her relationship with me, but her relationship with, my siblings. My mother never told me that she loved me, ever. The one time that she said it was when my sister, who has since passed away, had a brain tumor, and she was having surgery. It was malignant, and she was having surgery, and they went in to remove the tumor and found out they could not, because if they removed it, she was a speech and hearing therapist, by the way, but her speech would have been taken away and she would no longer be able to read. So they weren't able to do the surgery. So my mother called me up to tell me that was the outcome. And that was the only time that she said, "I love you," before she hung up. And, if any of us ever said to our mother, "I love you," she became very, very uncomfortable. She did not like to hear that at all. And actually, my first therapist told me that was the reason why I married my ex-husband, who's now since passed away, but was because he gave me the same kind of abuse that my mother did, and I associated that with love.
Yes.
And then that's another reason why you stay in that for a longer time, because you think, well, this is the way it's supposed to be.
Right. You don't know any different.
No. Though my father was not abusive to my mother. Though my mother was kind of abusive to my father.
That's what I think.
Yeah.
I remember one time she threw a rock maple chair at me, at my head. Wow. And I didn't move out of the way. I was 13. And I honestly thought, so if I die, I die. I just didn't care. And it smashed on the wall beside me. And who do you think my father got angry with? Me. He yelled at me because I didn't move out of the way.
Right. Right.
I mean, that's sad.
Yeah.
There issues of his own anyway.
Oh, my father did have issues. It was not a fun way to grow up. They were the kind of parents that everyone thought they were the perfect people, the perfect parents, and that they had the perfect family. So you had to kind of live a schizophrenic life,
Right.
You had to present yourself one way and you were living another way. And that's another thing my first therapist told me. He said, "You must be very intelligent, because I don't know why you're not schizophrenic with growing up that way."
Right. It's very confusing. And a lot of the perpetrators' character traits are very similar as well. They have this kind of like Jekyll and Hyde kind of personality.
Yes. They're so wonderful to everyone else.
Right.
Yes.
That no one could ever believe that they were doing anything heinous to you at home.
Right. Very charismatic and charming to the outside, but very cruel and just dismissive to what was going on inside. And that's why everything was kept inside. Even, I'm talking about even back in the day, things weren't talked about as they are now.
No.
People aren't shared, because everything was supposed to keep kept inside the family home. Right. Exactly.
Yeah. But are they usually abusive to the children too? Because my ex was abusive to me and the children.
Well, obviously, if they're not good husbands, they're not going to be really great fathers as well. So it can trickle down, absolutely, especially if the children try to become a protector of the mother and get in the way. Yeah, there's really no regard there.
My kids always saw me as the protector. He would try to be physical with them, and I would stand in between him and the kids, and I would take it. I never let him.
Yeah.
So they saw me as the protector.
Yeah. Some of the kids young, were seeing this and seeing their mom as not being able to protect themselves. So they would wedge themselves in there at a very young age and kind of stand up to the father, which,
isn't a good thing.
No, it's not good for anybody in that dynamic.
No, because I can tell you they're not going to care.
Right.
It's really rough.
Yeah.
It really is. I hope that a lot of people can hear this podcast, and if they are in a domestic abuse situation, that they will try to get help. And I know it's difficult. I know it's difficult to break from. I know it takes a long time and a lot of courage, but you can do it. And then you need to get help. Then you need to see a therapist, because you're damaged goods at that point.
Right. And at the end of my book, I end the book with an empowerment model and approach that I think is very, very helpful for anybody who's trying to step out and abolish their domestic violence relationship. An empowerment theory and approach talks about building a woman's self-courage, self-value, self-esteem up, so they can stand on their own and not emotionally lean on or physically or financially depend on somebody who's going to, their intent is to make them feel small or bring them down.
Mm-hmm. It's often very difficult for the, and domestic abuse goes the other way too. I want to make that clear, that the woman can be the abuser. But I think by and large, it's the husband that's abusing the wife. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, but it's been what I've seen. And we've seen but I think it's very difficult for the abused woman, because often you're not allowed to have a job or friends outside of the home.
Or finances. They're not exposed. Yeah.
The finances, nothing to do with the finances, and no way to get at those finances. So leaving and getting a job and having money to start up and make your escape is a very difficult thing. But usually if you can find a good therapist, they do give you empowerment tools to be able to do that. They encourage you to get your own bank account and to start putting money away, and they show you how to do it, and they try to help you. So anyway,
that, Joan, is part of a safety plan that a good therapist will develop.
That's right. A safety plan.
A safety plan with their clients who's experiencing this type of dynamic.
And you need to have it.
Absolutely.
And you need to follow it.
And you need to have the support. You need to have helpful and effective supports. You can't do this something you can't, you can do it, but you need some netting. You need some cushion. You just need it. And there's a certain type of support that is helpful, and there's a certain type of support that's counterproductive.
Yeah. What kind of support would be counterproductive?
Kind of like blaming the victim for the abuse. That's a prime example of something that mothers and families do. They advocate and cheer on the perpetrator, and they blame their daughter and them being victimized. That you must have done something wrong. You must have provoked this. So that's a very common thing. There are other things that are common that are not effective when supporting, even with therapists. Finding a good therapist, you're absolutely right. I think it takes a little bit of strategy to find the right fit for you as a client versus therapist. And when a client comes in and wants to get help on their domestic violence relationship, the therapist can't have their own agenda. The therapist has to meet the client where they're at. They might not be ready to escape and to leave their perpetrator. They might be psychologically ready for that yet. However, the therapist can't push and their own agenda on the client, and when they're not emotionally ready. And what therapists end up not doing, which is a disservice to the client, is they don't allow enough time for the victim to process their abuse. It's the first time, probably in a lot of cases, that they're even talking about the abuse. The therapist has to give ample amount of time for the victim to process and detail oriented about the abuse. So you got to have a therapist that is strong enough emotionally to listen to this type of trauma, and who has an expert in relationships, couples, domestic violence, has experience in dealing with a victim who's a female in a domestic violence relationship. So there's definitely some things that therapists can do better that I'm seeing what I collected from the survivors that were not so helpful. Therapists that would give them homework and would make them think outside the therapy session. That's very important. They need to do the work. The client needs to do the work. The victim needs to do the work. They need to start the process of helping themselves.
Yeah, or they're not going to be strong enough to leave.
Exactly.
You
exactly.
have to be equipped to leave. And I would say to anybody, whether it's a doctor or a dentist or a therapist of any type, a psychiatrist or a mental therapist, you don't have to do everything that they tell you to do. If it's not a good fit for you, change.
Right.
Get a different doctor, get a different therapist. You always, a clergy, if your pastor is not listening to you, get another pastor. If your doctor is not listening to you, if your therapist is not listening to you and not meeting you where you at, you need to find someone that's going to listen to you.
Right.
Really important.
And for my clients in my practice that have never had therapy before and want to see if it's a good fit for themselves, the therapist can offer a 30-minute free consultation to see how well the potential client and the therapist gel and see if it's a right fit for them. You can always find, you don't have to, just because you chose someone doesn't mean you have to stay with someone. And, so there are definitely a lot of providers out there and doing research, and definitely look at ratings and descriptions and pictures of who you want to help you and provide you the service and the care is vital.
Google reviews and Yelp.
Yep.
Go ahead and see what's being said. I agree. Yes, we all have choice. That's a really good thing. But someone in that situation often feels like they have no choice. But I just want to say you do have a choice.
Yeah, and I wanted to just say I really appreciate you calling them survivors as opposed to victims.
Mm-hmm.
You concentrate on survivors, mm-hmm. so they don't live in that victim mentality.
Well, how I view a victim is somebody who is in the situation. They mm-hmm. are in the actual mm-hmm. abusive situation.
Not when you are left.
Yes, when you are out of the domestic violence relationship, you are absolutely escaped it and abolished that relationship, you are now considered a survivor. Right. And with being a survivor, you do not have to take on a victim mentality at all.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people do, and then they fall right back into it again.
Right.
I think it takes a while to find your place and your footing and realize you are a survivor, because you've been a victim for so long. I mean, for me, it was a long time. And, being a survivor and realizing that you're a strong, competent person, and that you're now choosing your life, it takes a while to be on that.
But once you do leave, you are a survivor.
Yep. You are a survivor. And the reason why you're in survivor is because you're empowered.
Exactly.
And that's why the empower model and the empowerment approach is so vital for people that are trying to stand on their own, to try to have self-value, to try to have self-love, to try to have self-confidence. That empowerment you don't need from anybody else. You have that within.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Now, other people can be a great support, but you can love yourself and stand on your own 2 feet and have a wonderful support system around you.
Absolutely.
It's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
As Martha Stewart would say.
This has been awesome.
It has.
It has. I really appreciate you having me on your amazing podcast.
We really
we
appreciate you being on. I really hope that it helps a lot of people.
Yes.
Me too.
And this book will get into the hands that it needs to get into.
And before we leave, do you have any parting advice for people? One thing that's on your mind or on your heart?
If you're not feeling, if you're in a situation and you're not really sure what it is, but you feel like women have a certain type of instinct that is riveting. They know they might not know exactly what they're feeling, but they know something is wrong. If you feel something is wrong, let's not overlook it. There's so many times women just poo-poo their feelings and overlook their feelings, their initial feelings. Let's stop. Let's really examine those initial feelings. Let's bring it to the forefront. Let's really explore it. And because if you feel something is wrong, then probably something is wrong.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Finneran, for joining us.
Thank you, Rob.
Hope you have a great rest of your evening over there.
Thank you.
In Fort Lauderdale. And we're going to move you over to the side and this way.
We'll be with you in a minute.
We'll be back with you in a minute. Don't go away.
Okay.
And I want to remind everybody, episode Rewind is on this coming Saturday, May 7th at 5:30 p.m. on episode. It's episode 23. Joe Conjal, one of our favorites around here,
you all know,
and Dub Hunter, who
Mm-hmm.
was also a wonderful guest.
Yeah.
Is episode 23. Don't miss it. It's just watch right wherever you're watching right now. You'll be able to see it. Then next Wednesday on Meet the Author Live at 7 p.m. That's April 11th. Author Hank Kentz is going to be on, and he's got a lot of resources for writing. For if you have any questions about writing and publishing, as well as his own regular books too. We'd also like to remind everybody to watch or listen to the Voice of Indie podcast. It's on most Wednesdays on Blog Talk Radio, hosted by Beam Weeks and Stephen Gies from the Fresh Ink Group. You'll get to hear a lot of really good podcasts with them and meet a lot of good authors, indie authors. Would you have anything else you would like to share?
I think I talked more than enough tonight.
All righty then. I've never heard that before, but okay. So
neither has our audience.
No, I know that. So until then, until next time.
That's all, folks.
That's all, folks.
See you next week.
Thank you for joining us here on Meet the Author. Make sure you stay up to date with our show by clicking like, follow, and share. And you can find us on Spotify, iTunes, and more. See you next time on WLFE-DB.com.
You've been listening to WLFE-DB.com, where our shows are your shows.